In Matthew chapter 7, verse 15, Jesus says, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves." Do you get a picture in your head when you read that verse? I do. It goes all the way back to the cartoons I watched when I was a kid. I remember one cartoon that featured a wolf sneaking down to a herd of sheep covered in a sheep's pelt as a disguise. And I remember thinking, how are these sheep fooled by this disguise? It's the worst disguise ever. It barely covers him up. It's obvious that's a wolf. He looks so different from the sheep. But they're sheep, so they don't notice. And that's the picture I always got in my head before I did a little study on this verse. But I started to look into the wording, and I looked up the word that's translated sheep's clothing, and I found out that it doesn't just have to do with a sheep's pelt, like you see in the cartoon, but everything a sheep has on. So in this image that Jesus is painting for us, the false prophet's not just he's not just a wolf with a sheep's pelt on, but he has a sheep's face, he has the sheep's hooves, he has the wool, the tail, the whole 9 yards. So he is very convincing by his appearance. You can't just look at someone who is in a position of influence and judge by appearance whether he's going to be a good influence or a bad influence, a good teacher or a bad teacher. Jesus says you have to go deeper than that to make the proper judgment. So how do we judge whether someone is a good influence in our lives or a bad influence? Well, in the next verse, Jesus says you will recognize them by their fruits. Now he's going to the imagery of a tree with fruit. And we all know that the fruit of a tree will tell you exactly what kind of tree it is. If peaches are growing on the tree, it's a peach tree. If apples are growing on the tree, it's an apple tree, right? So what about a teacher? Well, if his teaching doesn't match the teaching in the Bible, then no matter what he looks like, no matter how well spoken he is, he's a false teacher. But if his teaching adds up, if it corresponds with what you find in the word of truth, in God's word, then he's a good teacher, a good influencer, even though he may not be very well spoken or may not look like a great teacher who's really smart. You judge according to the fruit, the product of their lives. Now, there are other things that you can look for as well that go beyond Matthew chapter 7. For example, you can also look at the motivation. What drives the person? Is he or she driven by self-interest, or are they driven by love? John said in 1 John chapter 4, verse 8, anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. So look at the motivation. And if they are driven by self-interest, if they're driven by their own selfishness, then they're wolves in sheep's clothing. They're not for real. And the last thing you can look at is, are they led by the shepherd? You know, it's not a sheep unless it's led by a good shepherd. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. John chapter 10, verse 14. The person that's influencing you, the person who's teaching you, is that person someone who lets Jesus lead their life? If not, they're not going to be a good guide for you. Now is the time to be paying attention to your influences, to the people that you admire, to the people you follow and listen to, because these are formative years. These years will determine the entire course of the rest of your life. And so make sure you're being led by Christ-like influences. Go out and look for them. Choose them. Shape the people who mold you. And I hope that you have a great day.